All right, happy weekend. So I'm just playing around with this still. I'm actually now I'm calling it. Let's see. Let's get this over into the editor. So I'm calling it like use reactive React. And what we're gonna do, I'm gonna first unlink this thing. And what we're gonna do is actually change the name of this because I was reflecting on like what to name this, and I think so first I call it use reactive hooks, but it's not really just the hooks. And I think that's the problem with the libraries, not the problem, but the challenge with current libraries exposing reactive hooks. It's like it's internal for components. And they include observation. So you kind of have to use the hook, and the observation will only work inside the component. But here we're actually like, we have a bubble plugin and an SWC plugin that makes all components observers of reactive state. So you're actually making, like you're using a reactive React, not just like a reactive hook. So I'm going to change that, and then I'm going to change the name of the folder here. Let's see. Let's see if I close that one, and then I'm going to open it again. But we're going to open it as observing. Oh, that didn't work. Let's see, where's my finder? Development. Oh my God, look at this. Reactive, observing React. Use reactive React. Okay. And then we can open it up. And I tried to like figure out how to convey the concept as well. So I wrote this README, but it's a lot of stuff. So what I did is that I asked, I was sitting in the car, and I love that with ChatGPT or like these LLMs, is that I can just sit in the car waiting for something. I can ask it something, and then, so here, could you help me? So I was, oh, there's a new update. So I was just sitting here talking to ChatGPT about the naming, and it suggested like use reactive state, and then I chose like use store, because what we're doing is, compared to use state, is that you also are able to include the methods. So use store, I kind of like that. And then that was weird with the effects, because then it was like use store effect or use store layout effect, which felt weird. But then use reactive is good, because you're saying use reactive. Reactive is a primitive that already exists. And then you have like use reactive memo, use reactive effect. Like it makes more sense, I think. And then I thanked it for that one. And then I just wrote it. So I'm trying to argue the value comparison and immutability makes a lot of sense for the reconciler of React. But when that leaks into state management of React itself, it creates a lot of mental overhead with manually managing references. I think at the component state management level, React should rather be reactive. So components just observe what state is used, and use memo and use effect would have the same behaviors. That means no dependency arrays. You can use JavaScript mutation API to change your state, and you will not have performance issues sharing state with other components. Could you help me write convincing arguments for this? Something that would make the general React developer at least recognize why this is a valid approach. And then it started like writing a lot of points, and each point makes sense. But then I changed the model. I changed to 4.5. So this was like the O3 mini high, the coding thing. And then I changed to 4.5. And then I asked it, could you help me write these arguments in more of a pitch format, something inspiring, but not to the point where I'm trying to convince anyone. And then it came up with this thing, which I really enjoyed reading. Can I copy this? Okay. Oh, failed to copy to clipboard. That's interesting. Can I try again? Oh, there it worked. Okay, so let's shove this. Okay, nice. So what it came out with is reimagining. This is a bit like clickbaity, but anyways, I just want to read it for you. So reimagining React state, embracing reactivity. React's reconciler famously leverages immutability and shallow comparison to optimize rendering, a brilliant technical decision. But what if this pattern, ideal for React's internals, becomes a burden when managing component states? I really like that one. Like the thing that makes the reconciler so great for UI reconciliation becomes a burden when managing component state. So less overhead, more flow. Imagine state management without constantly worrying about reference equality. No more manually spreading objects or creating new arrays. Your state becomes naturally mutable, intuitive, and straightforward, just plain JavaScript. Components simply observe the state they care about, automatically reacting to updates. This means no more exhaustive dependency arrays in useEffect or useMemo, freeing you from the endless vigilance required to keep these arrays accurate. Natural, intuitive, and developer-friendly. With reactive state, your updates feel natural again. Change what you need, how you need it, and let your components react automatically. Sharing state across components stops being a performance bottleneck. No expensive re-renders due to accidental reference changes. The framework intelligently ensures only the necessary updates flow through your components. Aligning simplicity with performance. This isn't a trade-off between developer happiness and app performance. It's a harmonious this is also, I really like this. It's a harmonious integration of both. Reactive state management ensures components updates precisely when needed, avoiding unnecessary renders, while providing a straightforward declarative coding experience. And this last thing I also really like, by aligning React's declarative power with modern reactive primitives, you gain a more seamless coding experience, reduce boilerplate, and enhance maintainability. It's React state simplified, empowering you to build better, more intuitive user experiences without the cognitive overhead. Is it time to rethink React state? Like it's, well, okay, reading this out loud now, it's very... it's very pitchy, but I did ask it to pitch it, so yeah. Anyway, so what I want to do now is I want to copy this and I'm gonna ask it while we play around with it some more. I'm gonna change to this one. Oh, it's not in preview anymore. Nice. Okay, so we're gonna want to write an article. I have this pitch. Let's just, how should I do this? Yeah, let's, oh, what happened there? Oh, they struggle a bit with, okay. But I also have this more deep dive of how things change and improve. MD, I probably don't have to write that, but I have it. Could you write me an article that is engaging? Could you write me an engaging article exploring these ideas and presenting them in a cohesive, isn't that a nice word? A cohesive and professional way, whatever. Oh, interesting. What if you keep the simplicity of React but enhance it with reactive primitives? Yeah, I didn't like this. Solving the async. Yeah, it's really hard, but it's super, super difficult to explain this, I think. I think it had some nice like summary ideas here. Yeah, maybe I should work some more on that. But yeah, I did not like how it did this. I wonder if I can't I do like a reasoning? You know what? Let's take this thing, copy, and then we're gonna try again. And I'm gonna do the, yeah, let's try this one. Reason for a couple of seconds. Okay, what's it saying here? React's design has long championed immutable state updates and shallow comparison, a strategy that powers is highly optimized. Yes, exactly. Yet, what if this strategy, perfect for internal performance, can sometimes create friction when managing component state in day-to-day development? Yes, exactly. Oh, this is a good start. A new paradigm is emerging that challenges this status quo by introducing a more natural reactive approach. Yes, the perfect introduction. This is exactly from overhead to intuitive flow. Imagine writing code where you don't have to be hyper vigilant. I like that. Like, it uses these words that I understand, but I would never come up with myself, about reference, equality, or constantly rebuild arrays and objects. Traditional React patterns require careful use of spread operator or intricate dependency arrays in hooks like useEffect and useMemo. These practices, while effective, yes, thank you, like balanced, impose a mental overhead that can detract you from the joy of, even it says from the joy of programming. The reactive approach shifts the paradigm. State becomes naturally mutable, updates are simple assignments, and components automatically react to the changes they depend on. This is amazing. The problem with today's patterns, many developers have encountered familiar frustration. Scaling state management. As your application grows, managing state across components can feel increasingly cumbersome. Dependency array pitfalls. Ensuring that dependency arrays and hooks are accurate can be error-prone and mentally taxing. Just using that word, like I would say, it's a fucking, I would like be very frustrated, but mentally taxing. And that's exactly what it is. Boilerplate overload. Whether updating state or exposing it safely through context, the required boilerplate can obscure the business logic behind layers of abstraction. Yes. By rethinking these challenges, we can create a system where state is expressed in plain JavaScript, mutated as needed, while the framework handles the reactive updates for you. Introducing reactive state, a developer-friendly alternative. The core idea is simple. Allow your state to be mutable and let your components subscribe to changes directly. With a reactive state system, updates happen seamlessly and only the parts of your UI that actually consume a piece of state are re-rendered. This minimizes unnecessary reconciliations and streamlines the flow of your application. Reduce boilerplate and enhance clarity. Consider the difference in state updates. In standard React, incrementing counter requires the overhead of creating new objects and managing reference equality. Now contrast that with a reactive approach where you can update the state using plain JavaScript. This change not only simplifies your code, but also makes it easier to reason about state transitions. There's no need to worry about spreading objects or the intricacies of dependency arrays. Safe asynchronous updates. React components can unmount at any time, making asynchronous state updates potentially hazardous. A common pitfall is updating state after components that's unmounted, which can lead to errors. With a reactive model, once a component unmounts, it automatically stops subscribing to state changes. For example, traditional approach, blah, 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 reactive approach, blah, blah, blah. This reactive system inherently protects against unsafe asynchronous updates by removing the need to manage subscriptions. What do you mean? Inherently protect against unsafe asynchronous updates by removing the need to manage subscriptions manually. That's not, I didn't like that one. That needs to be fixed. Anyways, bridging developer happiness and performance. The promise of reactive state management isn't just about reducing boilerplate. It's also about preserving, even enhancing performance. By aligning the declarative power of React with modern reactive primitives, you get targeted reconciliation. Only components that truly depend on a piece of state update, avoiding the overhead of unnecessary re-renders. Simplified context management. When passing state through context, only the consuming components that need Specific pieces of state will update. Exactly. Elimination of over-optimization. No need to fuss over use memo or memo wrappers when the reactive system intelligently manages dependencies. Consider a scenario where you need to share state across components. In traditional React, even if a component only uses a single function from a context, the entire context value might change with every... Well, will change with every update, forcing unnecessary re-renders. While with reactive state, by exposing state as read-only outside this owner component, you ensure that consumers only re-render when they actually Yeah, you don't have to say read-only, but yeah. A closer look at hooks and their reactive counterparts. Reactive state management reimagines several of React's core hooks with cleaner, more intuitive... Well, I wouldn't say that. Cleaner, more intuitive alternatives. Each of these alternatives is designed to remove the burden of dependency arrays and reference equality, allowing you to focus on writing business logic rather than orchestrate. Yes, that's a good line. Allowing you to focus on writing business logic rather than orchestrating state updates. Exactly. Updating state. Instead of juggling state updates with the usual spread operators and callbacks, you can now simply modify state directly. Traditional, reactive. Memoization simplify. Where use memo requires a careful curation of dependencies, use reactive memo automatically recomputes. Yeah, effectful update. Similarly, side effects becomes cleaner. Rather than managing blah, 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 toward a more intuitive future, reactive state management offers a promising avenue for the evolution of React development. By reconciling the ease of writing plain JavaScript with intelligent, fine-grained reactivity, it promises to reduce boilerplate, mitigate common pitfalls, and ultimately create a more enjoyable developer experience without sacrificing performance. As we continue to push the boundaries of what React can do, rethinking state management is not about discarding the familiar, but rather about enhancing it, enabling us to build more maintainable, scalable, and intuitive applications. Is it time to rethink React state? Embracing reactivity could be the next step in evolving our frameworks to better serve the needs of developers and end users alike. Okay, I generally liked it a lot. So we're gonna use that. But what we're gonna do first though, is we're gonna explore a bit more. We're gonna just change this thing. So use reactive, and I'm just gonna call it use read only. Actually, I'm not gonna use a hook for this because it really isn't a hook. I think I'm gonna use the same as I do in. I'm gonna do the same as I do in. Because it isn't like it isn't a hook. It doesn't do any hookiness. At least we're gonna try that first. Yeah, it's like it's a utility, right? So you wouldn't, but I don't like to expose read only as a function because it's bad for the IntelliSense, because there's so much other stuff that starts with read only. So yeah, we're gonna try that first. Use reactive layout effect, use reactive effect, and then use reactive memo. And then we're gonna yarn build it, and then we're gonna yarn link it. Yarn link. And then we're gonna move to family scrum again, and we're gonna yarn link use reactive react. Cool. And then we're gonna keep looking at this. So we were talking about how we're gonna just look at each of these things and just build a hook out of it instead. Just to explore. And then the way these patterns work is that you pass in this environment from the outside, because your React application is not really bound to an environment. So anything that like specifically targets like Firebase in this case, targets the DOM, stuff like that. That's environment specific stuff. So you should put that outside of React, and then you expose it to React through an interface. So in this case, we're gonna expose that interface using a context, because I want it to be available in any of these hooks by just using that context. So that's fine. And then we looked at how, so this should be use Reactive React. So this will be, sorry, use reactive effect, use reactive, and then use reactive effect, and then use reactive.read only. Yes, so the reason we use a callback here, like we're in React world now, so this actually reconciles. So when we're creating reactive, we only want to like I could technically like just go and parse this from local storage every time. That's fine. But it's kind of, it expresses better that this is part of the initialization of the initial state. So that's why I'm using callback. And then we want to listen to authentication changes when this thing mounts, basically. And then we have all the things going on here. And then yesterday we discussed like how I would like deal with these like nested state things. Like what if family needs to dispose of something, for example, when this effect, like, so it shouldn't only listen to state changes and then listen to authentication changes, but also unsubscribe to any other subscription that's like running. Yeah, I'm still a bit on the fence on that one. Because if I wanted to, so the point is like when you become unauthenticated, like this is what we have to be careful with. Like I don't like effects. I don't think you should use effects for state management. And the reason is it causes indirection, meaning that you're making a state change over here, and then in some other piece of code, you're reacting to that state change, as opposed to you change some state over here. On the next line, you run the effect of changing that state. That's co-locating, while the other is in direction. And so it's very hard to kind of put the system in your head. What actually happens when that state changes, and where's the code for it? It's very easy to reason about, oh, when I click this button, I can control click that function, and I go in and I see the state change. But then I can't command click anywhere, and I don't even know that when the some component somewhere reconciles because of that state change, an effect is going to run because of it and do something else. Like there's nothing describing that in that function. So what I would rather do is actually describe it in the function. So I change the state and then I run whatever that effect did on the next line. That makes it very clear what actually happens when you click that button. And then if that state change can happen from multiple places, well, I would call the same function, right? Or I would, if that state change within that function can happen different places, I would kind of lift this piece of logic, the state change and the effect, into its own function. And then I would call that from these different call sites, just to make sure that when the next developer reads the code and they command click whatever function they are curious about what happens when this function runs, they actually see everything that happens when that function runs. Where was I going with this? Yeah, so using these effects, like this is fine because this is about when this hook runs. This is more of an initialization thing. I want to subscribe here, and I want to unsubscribe when this scope is not valid anymore. That's fine. But then if I were to, like, in creating this family, I will kind of add a subscription somewhere, and then as part of this use reactive effect, I would not only unsubscribe to authentication changes, I would also clean up other subscriptions. But the point where I actually want to get rid of those subscriptions is when you're unauthenticated. It's not because the use session got unmounted. It's because I changed my authentication state to unauthenticated. I want to discard of any subscriptions created when I was authenticated. So in that, like, getting away from indirection, I would want to write that here. This is where I clean up any subs. Because then you know what happens when you get unauthenticated. This is where you would look, like, what does it mean to be unauthenticated? Oh, you have possibly a reason for it, and then you can sign in. And oh, by the way, it also cleans up any subscriptions. But if I were to make an indirection out of this, I would create like a new use reactive effect. I would look at the current state, and when it becomes unauthenticated, I will clean up the subscriptions. Right? But then I don't see that connection anywhere. I just see that if I happen to scroll by it, I would see it. But if I were to, like, command click into unauthenticated somehow, I wouldn't know that moving into this state actually cleans up the subscriptions. So I guess what I want to conclude with here is, like, if I had any subscriptions, what I would do, like, to write out the code is unsubscribe. I would do something like this. So I would unsubscribe. So this use reactive effect means what should we do to initialize and what should we do when this is disposed of. So I want to unsubscribe to authentication changes, and I would like disposers for each, and then dispose of each of those subscriptions as well. But then I would do, well, what I should say is clear subscriptions. I will have a function called clear subscriptions, which would actually clear subscriptions, and we'll kind of call it here. And I would also call it when it kind of is disposed. That never really happens in this app, but it would be the right thing to do. But this is the thing, this is the cost of using React, is that everything that has to do with initialization becomes an effect. As opposed to if you move outside of React, we wouldn't have to do any of this. Like this session, we can move into the actual session. So this is outside of React, which means that when you call session, it will only run once. You can pass it the environment. I can just set up these disposers. I can just look at the cached authentication to initialize the state. I can set up my subscription, and I can return the read-only version of that state. And then, as you can see, on unauthenticated, I go through disposers to clear things out. So this expresses better the initialization of the session as opposed to this. It uses this effect to do it. So I was almost like, because regardless of where this ends up, in the documentation of this, I would express like the patterns from these Bonsify explorations and state that like you shouldn't use effects. The only reason to use an effect is that you need to initialize something as the hook mounts. But then it's weird, like if that's the opinion of this thing, Yeah, but saying that out loud now, I think it's important that one message here is introducing reactive hooks, like proper reactive hooks, where all component, like a reactive paradigm to React, where all components are observers, and when you're using these hooks, you'll get this value proposition. And then another thing is patterns, where you can say like you shouldn't be using reactive, like you shouldn't be using effects, for example. Only reason to use an effect is just because you want to run something when the component mounts. And you want to dispose of something when it unmounts. Because of indirection and all that stuff. But what's interesting here, like saying that, the reason I even have disposers in this version outside of React is because this version is responsible for also setting up the family scrum state. So when I'm authenticated, the authenticated state actually has the family scrum state, which sets up a bunch of subscriptions. But now that I'm inside React, the session is just the session. There's another component, the actual family scrum component, that's going to use family scrum passing in the authenticated session, and it will set up what it needs. So in that sense, it's also cleaner. Yeah, so we're just gonna and so we can just drop this subscription stuff. And I have to be careful because I've been down this path before refactoring, where I made choices based on the previous paradigm, and then they don't make sense at all. So, okay. So we're happy about this. This is exactly how you would express the same logic with like use reactive React. And then we can move into family scrum. So we're going to copy this and we're going to create a new file, use family scrum. And then we're going to see how we should. Oh, interesting. Let's see. Import use reactive. I guess use reactive effect is something we're going to use. Use reactive React. So let's do use reactive. Okay, so this is starting to get interesting already. So here I'm using the env. Yeah, so let's call it use family scrum. The only thing I would pass in here is the actual session. So that would be session authenticated. And then the env is something I would get from use env. You know what? We're actually going to create that thing. Let's create a file called use, environment index export function use. And so I'm just going to say that it returns the environment. Change spelling, or let's do, sorry, return as environment, just so we actually have it in here to get the full feeling. So I would get, but now it's like every time it reconciles, it's gonna go and create family persistence and family storage, which is something I don't want. But again, we can argue that this is initialization, right? So just like we did before, we can go in here and we can initialize it. So we're gonna do, just move this stuff into the initializer. But now we have to be careful, because now these things, yeah, this is gonna be interesting. Use reactive. Yeah, now we have to think, because how would I actually deal with this? Because one pattern we used is, So for every like nested state here, you can think of these as domains of the app or the state management: groceries, to-dos, dinners, and weeks. I would pass down the parent state. And the reason I would do that is because then I could pass like just the groceries down to the groceries component, for example. But if I needed something from the parent state, so a very good example of this is just us passing session here, right? So I'm passing session, that's the parent state. And I'm hooking that session in here. Yeah, but this is interesting because I wouldn't actually use these. Okay, so let's imagine now, I wouldn't actually. This is interesting. How would I actually do this? Oh, did I remove it now? So how would I actually do this? Because I'm passing it. Well, it doesn't need environment, but it would. Okay, so that's interesting. It would need family persistence and family storage. Yeah, this is interesting because I actually think that these two are more context. Or maybe it should just be on. Well, okay, so this is interesting. What I could do is I could put family. No, that's the point. Like, I don't want. Yeah, what do I want here? Like, how would. Like, that's also. Okay, so just to explain what's in my head. So, the great thing about this is that family scrum is a scope that has family persistence and family storage. And then the state management is the only thing that can reference these things, which is why I'm passing it down to these like nested state domains. It's never exposed to the components. The components knows nothing about family storage and family persistence, which is a good thing. But when we're looking at use family scrum, how would I be able to pass family persistence and family storage down to these things? Well, okay. So let's just write it out. So let's say I want to keep it working like it works now. I would have to put all of these. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I think maybe I've done it opposite. Oh, this is interesting. So we're going to create a family storage. I'm going to fix the on dispose, but let's imagine now I don't need that. Oh, this is also interesting because I'm initializing this. Like, okay, so what's in my head? I'm curious about, would I treat to-dos as its own hook? And if I were going to treat it as its own hook, what it would need is family scrum to be able to like do anything. And if so, what should it get from family scrum? Should it get the attached session and awake? But then where would it get family persistence and family storage from? Should it create it on its own? So I wouldn't actually pass it in. I would just create it for every like to-dos and everything, which is fine. But what is actually family scrum then? I have a wake here, but I don't actually have to add it now because it has, like, it's part of the environment. So that's also something I don't like here, is that when it's part of React, it means that I'm exposing the environment to all the components. But in the other one, the environment is completely hidden from React. The only thing React has access to is one root object, which is the state management. And then you can pass like branches of that state to specific components. But at the end of the day, it's this single object. Everything's hidden from it. Everything's read-only. It's a beautiful thing. But here I'm like actually exposing the full environment, like any component can use env. And then start like messing around with storage, with persistence. And I don't want that in actual components. I only want hooks to be able to do that. But then you can say, yeah, but that's just a matter of like how you approach it, how you write the code, and like your own patterns kind of thing. And I guess that's fair. But what this really means is that I don't need family scrum. The only thing I see as a problem really is, well, okay, we're gonna change this. So we're gonna still have family scrum, to-dos, groceries. We can even add freaking awake here, but we're gonna change how, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move family store. This is a challenging thing. It's this, yeah, just 2 seconds. Yeah, so but this is the challenging thing with React. It's the instantiation, I find. But what we can do here is that we can say now groceries equals use groceries, right? And then we don't have to pass in, but we can pass in session here, right? So we're going to create all these different things like use groceries, to-dos, use to-dos, session, session. And I would probably have done this, I think, to begin with. So we're going to pass in session and then dinners. And then we have weeks, use weeks, pass in the session. And then we're not going to do any of this. We are just going to, and we're not even going to do this. We're just going to create this new state. Let's see. And then we can actually just attach them. So we have groceries, to-dos, dinners, weeks. So this is going to be our family scrum. It has a session. We bring in a wake from the environment. We have groceries, to-dos, dinners, and weeks. And now we're going to go to groceries. Let's see. Let's create that file. By the way, we need... Okay, let's see. Use groceries, TS. Just keep that one. Let's look at the groceries now. So that will be use groceries. And then we would take this stuff. Okay, this is going to be interesting. So the only thing we would actually pass in here is the session. So that would be session authenticated. And then persist, n would be use n. And then we would have to we wouldn't have to go in and just create. Okay, it doesn't need family storage. Yeah, it's interesting. Like what we could have done here instead is like not have create family API. We would just pass in the family ID for every API call. Yes, I have to be careful here. Like, and I could even just call it get family API and it wouldn't feel that bad. Create just seems like it's doing work, but it's not really doing work. So let's imagine that's fine. And then family persistence, groceries. Yeah, and then it's groceries API. And then groceries will be use reactive. And now the point is, I don't really need family scrum. Well, yeah, that's the thing. How would I now be able to reference family scrum, right? So I would still need to do the same thing, I think. Yeah, but that's the whole point. I can do the same thing. So if I want to do get groceries, return groceries, and then get to-dos, return to-dos, and get dinners, return dinners. Because what I want to do is, okay, this is interesting. Get weeks, return weeks. I'm not going to pass in the session. I'm actually going to pass in family scrum here. Because family scrum has the session. So use groceries function, use groceries. So this would be family scrum, family scrum. And this will be family scrum.session. The whole point of this is that when I'm pointing to family scrum, when I'm pointing to groceries, I can point back up to family scrum. This is just a pattern. It's not like this is how you do it in reactive paradigms. This is just a pattern. And then on dispose would be use reactive effect. And this would be like this. And then use reactive read only. Yeah, and then each grocery, where are you, grocery? So I think that's the thing that also, that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. Not kind of, it actually does make it a lot more difficult. Yeah, is that now we only have a hook, right? But we want, yeah, this is a big problem. The reason this is a big problem is that in this old, not the old paradigm, but when you do go outside of React, all of these things are the same. Everything you see here is implemented exactly the same way. You can compose it however you want. It's just the same stuff. But in this new thing, for example, use groceries is an actual hook where you can use the use reactive and use reactive effect hook. But then you see I have something called grocery because I want to represent each grocery as its data and the ability to shop that grocery. And even though I'm not actually... Huh? Kult. 2 seconds. Å ja, du fikk litt ekstra bonuspoeng, men vi får nå se hva som kan... Nice. Skal vi sjekke til boksen da? Blå er favoritten. Og så... Bra. Fikk ny hjul. Ikke av de. Ok. Skal du kjøre med? Bra jobba. Ja, da får du ikke noen penger da. Det går bra. Oi, det har kommet ny bilskål. Ja, det er litt da. Bilskål. Jeg kan sjekke det etterpå. Right, sorry. Yeah, so my point is you can't make a single grocery a hook. So you can't make it state reactive. So there's a inconsistency here between the use reactive hook and you wanting to actually just make something reactive. Yeah, just make something reactive. And then I think it gets too complicated. Just becomes too complex to think like, okay, what are hooks and what are like nested reactive state? That's not like a hook, it's just something nested. What I would do then is like, I wouldn't actually have a hook. I would rather yeah, I wouldn't have a hook. I wouldn't have use reactive. I would just do like, okay, you want some reactive state, you can say state equals, like ideally you would just say reactive, right? But you can't do that because of reconciliation, it would reset the whole object. So you would have to do something like this, which I don't like. Use state reactive. Like this is how you would have to express it if you actually wanted a hook to represent that state. Yeah, this is very interesting. This is a big bummer. Like, not everything is like state defined on a hook. You might want to map over something and make that state reactive, but then there's no way to point to that state in a reactive with a reactive reference without, like, basically the only way to handle this is to actually export the actual reactive as well, so that you would be able to do, like, you could have a grocery if you wanted to have that. So just to put that in context, where's use groceries? So as you can see here, whenever the groceries update, I'm setting the groceries and I'm mapping over the data and I'm creating a grocery. But I want each grocery to represent a piece of reactive state. So now I'm like creating that grocery, passing its data, and also family persistence so that it can access. Yeah, or I could like pass on shop, for example, instead. If I didn't want to pass family persistence in there. But now this grocery needs to be able to use this reactive, like this function. So basically, if you want all of this stuff to work with React, you would also need to be able to just create something reactive. And then the complexity starts to creep in. Yeah. I really dislike this. Like, the point is that in this case, as I said, we're not actually, it doesn't need to be reactive because we're not changing the data in any way. But I could have like increase here. And then like grocery dot count plus plus, for example. And if this wasn't like actually a reactive reference, this wouldn't work. It would change the number, but it would just mutate and not trigger any observation. So you have to be able to create these reactive references. And it's so clean when you just have reactive. Ja. Vad säger du? Right, so okay, so we kind of have a list now where of bad things doing this. Bad things are, okay, use session. The bad things are you have to have this callback to be able to, like, again, think about reconciliation loop. What's actually initializing what I only need to run once. And then you have to use an effect to signal, like, I just want to do this for initialization. So that's another negative. And then the last, like, really the thing that makes this unappealing to me, both of these things are fine. Like, it's not something crazy, it's something all React developers know. So like, that's the point as well, right? use reactor should work just like use state. It's just simpler. And it works just like that. And use reactive effect works exactly like you would expect. Where it breaks though is when I need to create some nested reactive state. Then I can't use the hook anymore because it's not a hook basically. It's just creating some object. And that means this thing here also needs to export reactive. That's the only way to get around that. And then the question kind of becomes like what you could do as a demo is like you could just create a variable outside of component, like a counter or whatever. And then you could just use it inside the component. But then you can also use reactive inside the component and it will work exactly the same. But what does that really mean? Why do you want to do it inside the components? Like, why do you want to do state management inside components? Well, like one thing is UI related, of course. Like if it's tied to the elements or the actual UI, of course you want to do it in the components. But that's not the kind of state we're talking about. Yeah, like it doesn't make it simpler, I think. At the end of the day, this doesn't make it simpler. So for example, with the, where are we? So if we didn't use reactive here, for example, yeah, and that's kind of the point as well. It's like with the use state, you can't actually combine functionality with state. Those are two separate things, which I think is one of the biggest problems, is that like an app is two things. It's state and how to interact with that state. And if you can't describe those two things together like you do in a class, you lose something. Yeah. I'm not sure what to conclude on this. Like this Bonsify project is like you literally have one primitive reactive. But now you have use reactive, you have use reactive effect, use reactive memo. Those are fine in and of themselves. But then if we also have to introduce reactive, it just, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. And what's kind of the goal here? Like, I think it would be very helpful for developers using React to just, what if React introduced use reactive, right? What if React actually built observers around all components? And then this new hook called use reactive. That's kind of the point here. And then you have like use reactive effect, use reactive memo. All this just fits in. But I think a bigger mind shift actually from what you used in React with use state as opposed to use reactive is that you can put methods. Like well, technically you can do the same with use state, right? If I wanted to create a counter, set state equal use state. So I can do count 0, increase, set state, and then current count plus 1. Like you can do this. It's just that we don't. But it's actually a much better way to do it as opposed to putting increase with a use callback behind here. But this is what I mean. I think this is like we're not used to using React this way. So kind of putting that's its own pitch in and of itself. Hæ? Er det det? Så bra, Oskar. Var det artig med sånn beachball, eller? Kult. Da så si fra når du starter en ny kamp, da, så jeg kan se. Yeah, so this is just something to... This is like so different from what we do in React. Yeah, I'm kind of... I think it's slipping. I do think it's slipping. But I did get a lot of great like text here. I did get that. Yeah. And it's also interesting how you kind of have this context that you can use as dependency injection. That you don't have to pass so much stuff down all the time. But that's not the problem. Yeah, I think I'm gonna give up on this. Rather take like these nice arguments and rather put it into Bontify to explain what Bontify is, which is still just a pattern, right? But yeah, it was really, really good. React's design has long championed immutable state updates and shallow comparison, a strategy that powers its highly optimized reconciliation process. Yeah. I do not think currently it makes sense to fuse reactivity with React components. But there just is something about using the same hook for all your state, right? That's the thing that keeps me hanging. What if you could just use reactive everywhere, right? It doesn't matter. You can use it in a context provider. You can use it in just a normal component, just for local state. You can use it in a hook. Like it's all just reactive. But then as we saw, we also need to we also need to have the actual reactive thing. So you can do like nested reactivity, because you can't do nested hooks, right? Or it will be like very React-ish in the sense that, okay, groceries just returns the data, right? And then when you consume the data in a specific grocery component, it will become like an actual grocery. Like you would use grocery and pass it the data. But the whole point is like not to expose the data, because you only want to expose that grocery state. That controls what a grocery is. A grocery isn't its data. It is its data, read only, with specific methods to interact with that data. That is the grocery. And if we fuse everything with React, you get this like, React becomes this like, yeah, just becomes a natural, like exposing the data just to pass the data to a component so that the component can, or maybe that's fine. Maybe that's fine. Okay, you know what? We're gonna look at this differently. We are going to think about all of these as their own hooks. We're gonna force to think about them as hooks. So when I do use groceries, I can't do create grocery. I can just set the data. Okay, so now I have some read-only groceries data. So let's call that grocery DTO. That's what I have. And it's like, it's read-only, so you can't change it, right? That's fine. So we're gonna remove this. We still have add grocery here. Yeah, and then with the filter, I'm not quite sure what's happening. Oh, sorry. So filter would also be grocery DTO. What are you complaining about? Oh, sorry, grocery DTO. So I can still filter them and return them. Okay, this is going to be very interesting. What's wrong with you, mister? So we're not gonna, okay, so we're not allowed to expose this. That's bad. Oh yeah, I wrote all this stuff. Okay, so now grocery is going to get its use grocery, new file use grocery ts. And then we're gonna grab grocery and we are gonna shove you into use grocery. So what would happen in the components now is that the groceries component would use groceries, right? And it would get the data, but then it would pass that data into a component called grocery. And that grocery component would pass the data into a hook called use grocery. So this would now be use grocery, and it would just take the data, kind of the same, but it won't take. So this takes grocery DTO. And then we would again use reactive here. And yeah, increase isn't part of it. But this family persistence now. Yeah, again, I would just, oh yeah, so yeah. So what's interesting to me now is that to use this grocery, I also need the family persistence. And to get to family persistence, I need a family ID. And to get the family ID, I need the session. So now I would actually need to like pass in not just the data, it would also need access to but okay, again, let's just continue. So what I would do is use family scrum. That would be introduced on a context, right? Because I need it to be on a context. Yeah, whatever. So I would provide family scrum on the context so that any component can access family scrum. And that's fine. So when I do use grocery, I would be able to say const n use n const family scrum use family scrum. And then I would be able to say something like family persistence would be n.persistence create family API. And I would do family scrum session.family ID. And that's fair, I think. Yeah, so I think the thing that is the thing that happens here is that you're going to be using contexts more because I'm using it for environment. I'm using it for family scrum here. Maybe you would even use it. Well, yeah, family scrum because it has the authenticated session. Yeah, but that is actually fair, I think. And what's also interesting about this is that each of these hooks actually is bound to each of these components. That's also something I find interesting. Okay, but we're gonna do this now. We're gonna create so use family scrum would be like a context. Do I even want to do this? No, I think we can just do this for now. Even though family scrum here needs like the session, let's imagine it doesn't need it. It's been provided as part of the context. But how would this actually look like in components? So we have to imagine this. Like I have a groceries component. It's using family scrum, maybe. Yeah, it's using family scrum to get the groceries, access to the groceries. And then it maps over those groceries. And for every grocery, it mounts a grocery component. And that grocery component is given the data of a grocery. And then inside that component, it passes that data to use grocery. And then it creates this thing here. But I don't quite like it. The reason is, well, I guess it's fine. Yeah. And even though like it's not as efficient because it would like create this object on every reconciliation. So imagine that grocery like updating and updating and updating. We would create a family API every time. We would create this object every time, even though it would only use the initial object. Yeah. But I think what I want to do here, I'm getting a bit tired. It's been a long day. I've been in 2 birthdays. One of them for a 4-year-old in the whole kindergarten. Oh my god, it's freaking exhausting. So what I think we should do, I'm gonna just reset the changes we have here. Gjør du det? Kult. So we're resetting all these changes. 2 seconds. Det var en ny sånn maling. Men det er bare en sånn finish, heter det. Det er ikke noe nytt mønster. Det er bare sånn. Hva heter den da? Ja, det er liksom bare en sånn en. Men jeg vet ikke hva den heter, eller hvem bilen passer til. Men jeg tror det var til en annen bil også. Nei, men da, sorry. Det var en paint finish, var det. Det er noe annet der. Det er her, ja. Så... Var det den? Ja, det var det. Sånn der. Beach ball igjen. Var det okay? All right, sorry. So we're actually gonna do a proper refactor of this. So I'm not giving up on this. There's huge value in having like one hook that represents like a it doesn't matter what context you're using it in, a hook, in a component, or a context. It just is performant out of the box, right? And you can use normal, like all the stuff we talked about. But to properly test this, we did some discovery now. So what we're going to do, I'm going to do a checkout here, and then what we call it, use Reactive React. And then we're actually going to move, first of all, environments here. We're actually going to create the context for this. End context, create context. Vent litt da. So the end here is environment, and then we're going to return. Yeah, so this will be TSX now. Return end context value is the end. And of course we need children. React node, and then children here. Okay, so now we have our environment, just 2 seconds. Okay, so now we have this environment. So in the main app, we need to provide that environment. So now we're not going to do the session here. I'm going to drop that session, but we are going to do the end provider thing, and we're going to give it the end, and that will be the browser environment. Okay. Yeah, and I guess we can do it. Looks better this way. Oh, what the hell did I do? Oh. Okay, and then we have the session, and this session doesn't take anything. It actually creates the session. So this would be const session equals use session. And then we're gonna create our new use session file. So this is how we're gonna do it. Like all this stuff was exploration. Ja? Ikke akkurat nå, skal jeg. Nei, jeg har ikke noe lyst til å spille. Jeg er lei for det, Oskar. Sorry, I have a 4-year-old and he's not happy about me not wanting to play with him. Okay, let's just remove all of these and then, yeah, that one. User. Okay, so this, yeah, this is interesting because we have something called a user here and 2 seconds. Yeah, but now but if we're in the same problem again immediately, like what if user is something, or to put it differently, what if the authenticated session would set up some unique subscriptions? And it kind of does, because like what if the family updates, right? Maybe there's a new family member. So that's something I haven't implemented there, but that can happen. So when you move to authenticated, we want to set up a subscription and we want to actually change the family. Yeah, so again, we will kind of have to, yeah, but okay, let's play with it. So here we wouldn't actually have a user. Like, as I said, every one of these concepts needs to be its own hook. So this will be user DTO. This will be family DTO. Okay, so we're gonna just do that for now. And then there's no env here. const n is use and, oh, I didn't create that. Use and return use context and context. Okay, so use session, use and we have the end. We don't need these disposers. We don't really care that we do use and use reactive. Oh, come on. Import use reactive from use reactive. Oh my god, why doesn't it show that? It's no big deal that we read from local storage here. It really only happens once. This one though needs to be use reactive effect. That's fine. We're not doing the disposing here. We're just returning these states. That's fine. And then for family, we're just returning family. We're not pointing back up to family scrum. We just have the user, no on dispose here. We can really just return it. Yeah. And just return it and then wait. Oh, what happened here? Oh yeah, sorry. Authenticated. Session authenticated. There we go. Okay, so this is how it's gonna look. But now we have this issue of sorry, use session. Wait. Use session. Use session. Okay. So that's how I would implement it here. But now we're going through the session and we're going to family scrum. And this is not gonna, this is just gonna send the session. Well, the session state really, because use session has a specific state that we want to return. Or we could say not necessarily state. What we could do is we could pass down like user and family, for example, because we don't really care about, yeah. So I would say session state user, family, session state family. Okay, so now we go into family scrum and this is gonna get a user DTO. It's gonna get a family of family DTO. And then what's gonna happen here is that, yeah, and this is interesting because we're gonna have a lot of contexts. And that's also what I don't like. Because now we need oh, interesting. What we could do here though, sorry. So what we would do is that we would create an authenticated context which holds the user. So we wouldn't actually pass it down. What we would rather do is wrap this in a session context, right? And you only have a session context when you're actually authenticated. And the session context takes the user, session state.user family. Okay, he's getting very impatient. Ja, kommer strax. Yeah, it's just me doing stuff all day. That wasn't for me. Now I had a chance to sit down, but I guess I overstayed a bit. But okay, so this is what we would do. We would definitely use contexts more, because now I want to provide the authenticated context for the nested components. And then we have family scrum, which also becomes this, well, I guess actually you could say that we're going to give the family scrum context here. Yeah. Family scrum context. Yeah, this would actually hold. Oh my god, it's so exhausting. Ja, jag kommer snart. Yeah, because then we would add the user and the family to the family scrum context. We would add. Yeah, that's basically what we would add there. And then we would have. Yeah, but it would still be a lot of context. Okay, I have to go use. Oh, fuck. Bye.